And then in 1984, you were talking about getting closer to your dream, and you found a little
I found a store.
shop.
I wrote in my, and I can't say enough how this has worked all through my life. I've wrote in my journal a dream, and it was just that. There was nothing to back it up. And whenever I've written anything like this, it's so fantastical because I'm like, what? Flying to Europe to buy fabric? I don't even know how to do that. But actually, what I did was I would write it down and then I would put it aside and not look at it. It would be years later I would come across it and go, oh my gosh, I achieved everything on that dream way before the dates I thought I would. And so part of that was to have my own store. But in the 80s, there was that massive thing going on before the 87 crash with all that bullish market being really crazy and property development, a bit like what happened before this financial crisis now. And, you know, there were people paying crazy amounts of money for key money, and I just knew I didn't have 150,000 for
Maybe
the
just
key money.
explain key money, but it was addition to the lease, wasn't
Yes,
it?
it was in a way to get into the lease, but it was an addition to anything else that went into the store. It didn't pay for a rack, or it didn't pay for a paint over, or it was dead money really. It was key money, and you paid that for the...
People could ask anything really, couldn't
and they were, and people were paying anything, and it was ridiculous. And I was like, oh, you know. But I guess with a dream, you never let anything get in your way of it. And so I decided that while that might be the case, it's not going to be my case. And I was right in the end. I found this funny little dry cleaner's store, and it didn't have the right window that I was imagining, but I had the window cut down. But all the way, every step of the way, people would tell me I couldn't do it, it wasn't right. No, the concrete cutter said, oh, you know, this is a diamond cutting job, this will be... I don't know, something in my gut went, no, it's not. I'm sure it's not as bad as he's telling. Okay, go ahead with it. I'll pay whatever it takes, knowing that actually I didn't have that money to pay if it really went bad. But I also knew that, you know, there's a lot of naysayers, I think, when you get into something where you're wanting to live your dream. There's lots of people who tell you why you can't have it and why you can't do it. And I just felt that that was what he was telling me. Sure enough, that window was cut down and out. You know, the concrete was cut out in 2 hours, and wasn't the 3 weeks he was telling me if I come across this and that and the other thing. So I guess, you know, I was determined to have this dream. I then went ahead and, you know, I learned how to get a garment made. I used to get garments made inside out. They'd come back to me inside out, tied in a bundle in a plastic bag, and I'd get them out and go, what is that? That's not how a garment looks. I mean, that's how naive I was. I had no idea that they didn't come all beautifully finished on a hanger looking like they do in a shop. They come looking like I don't know what. And I remember crying all night the night before that store opened, because I was like, who am I to think I could do this? Who's going to come and buy it? Why do I think someone would want to wear what I've thought up?
A real crisis of confidence.
Complete. I had that all the way along, but this was a deep crisis at 3 a.m. before my store opened at 9 a.m. And, you know, that still happens today, actually, probably on a different scale or different things, but I certainly, you know, still test myself greatly. But the next day I opened, and it was a huge success from the very beginning. And it
I remember you saying you sold like a week's worth in the day and a month's worth in the week, and went on from there.
It did, and it never stopped. And I've sort of been, I don't know, I think I must be one of these people who likes to be like rushing, because I've never been anything else but rushing from one thing to another. And maybe I add another label if I don't think I'm rushing enough. I don't know. So anyway. But it was a great success, and it was a great ride, and I loved it. And I opened my store in Wellington, and I loved my store in Wellington and Woodford Street, and it really was great. And it was a great personal growth for me as well. And I really was the University of Trelise for me in training myself how to become a designer. And well, not so much the ideas, because I believe there's a difference. You know, a designer is someone who has the ideas and makes them happen. And then there are people who make patterns. That's a real technical job, and sometimes it is the designer, and I take my hat off to them, and because I don't know how you can design and make patterns and make it all happen and still have a business. But and then there's a very technical skill called sewing, and it's a really specialised skill. And I realised no way would I be able to get to that level, even if I could, which I couldn't. My brain doesn't operate like that, but I could not get to the level that would be necessary. So I knew early on I needed the idea, and then I needed to be able to project manage it to come out at the other end. And so that's what my life has been.
What came out in the original interview, though, was that it kind of worked for you that you didn't know a lot of the technical details, because you knew what sort of garment, what details you wanted on the garment, and you used to take them to the sewers, you said, and in fact they got out of their mould, didn't they, because they learnt in a certain strict way, needed a template to sew things, and you just said, just do this and this and this, and so you freed them up.
I think I did. You know, I also think that about people who have worked with me in pattern making as well, because when I came in, because I was unconventional and I had unconventional ideas, when I wanted to do something like, I remember this one skirt where you just took bits of fabric and sewed it. Now, I mean, we see these sorts of garments around a lot now, but back then that was sort of radical, very radical. And they were going, but you need a template for that, and the template needs to change every size. And I'm like, oh, just pick up a bit of fabric and sew it. And they're like, well, you don't do that. You can't do that. And I'm like, well, I'm saying do it, because try it, please. I had lots of resistance early on to these wacky ideas and not sticking to the rules and not doing it, you know, in a very engineered way.
And you weren't mass producing, so...
No, I wasn't, and so I had lots of resistance to it, but I believe that gave my the uniqueness and the unique handwriting that my label became because of that lack of conventional approach, and so I've always said that not being trained through a design school probably has been, you know, a blessing in disguise, and I'm still happy about that, but I would encourage any young girls out there to do the usual route. It's probably easier.